well, 2 months ago at this point, I asked my subscribers to design their own folklore monsters. And as always, you all delivered. It was so much fun going through all the submissions. And today, I'm going to be taking some of those submissions and redrawing them in my own art style, and matching them up with a story based in this folklore realm that I've created with one of my OCs. Let's create some chaos! I walked down the main road of the village, taking in the people hurrying back and forth between stalls. It took some time to get used to, but my village had an extended period of peace for the first time in many years. When me and my hunting companion Aravi returned from our trip in the forest, I felt a change in the very air around me. Initially, I thought it was a foreboding warning of danger to come, and for the first week or two, I was on high alert, staying up all night to keep an eye out for potential night creatures. Aravi eventually convinced me to relax, and for the most part, I did, but I never stopped looking over my shoulder. As time went on, I eventually came around to believing the forest around my village really was silent. However, that didn't stop my worries from shifting elsewhere. Sure, there weren't any night creatures outside of the village, but what about the ones inside? During our last hunt, me, Aravi, and another companion of ours, Dylan, were ambushed by a night creature, a curse named Hex. Hex ended up possessing Aravi, and despite my efforts to find a vampire fang to uncross her, she seemed to grow fond of Hex and the advantages they provided her. However, I knew far too well that not everyone would be as accepting as her. Before we headed back, I told Aravi she would have to keep Hex hidden from the rest of the village, lest she be hunted by them. I'd be lying if I said I didn't take solace in the fact that I was no longer the only one with a secret that I had to hide from the very village I protected. "Excuse me, sir." A voice shook me from my thoughts. I turned to see a sickly man standing in a nearby alleyway. He was much older than most of the people in the village. He had long gray hair that covered most of his facial features, and the rest of him was covered by a blue shawl that draped over his hunched body. One hand held onto a wooden staff that had a doll swinging from it, while his other hand was outstretched towards me. "Can I trouble you for a spare coin or two?" I froze at those words. People down on their luck was nothing unusual in my village, but those words, combined with the man's features and the doll hanging from the staff, meant only one thing. The figure that stood before me was a night creature, and no matter what I did, this could be the end of my village. I shook the creeping anxieties away, reached into my pocket, and pulled out several coins that I had gotten from a client earlier that day. I counted out 20 of them and placed them into the man's hand. For a while, he didn't move, seemingly weighing the amount of currency that I placed in his palm. Eventually, he closed his hands around the coins and lowered his arm. "Thank you for your kindness, sir. You were brought up well. Enjoy your night." The man sunk into the shadows of the alleyway. I stared at the spot where he stood, preparing myself to see him again very soon. My generosity may have saved my own skin, but the fate of this village was dependent on everyone else. I stood there, thinking over all the things in my head, when I remembered. "Aravi!" I mustered the strength to unfreeze my body. I turned and took off running back the way I'd come. I bolted through the village square, paying no attention to the people in my way, some who were undoubtedly responsible for the destruction that was about to come our way. The sickly old man hobbled his way outside of the village perimeter, the coins bouncing around in his hand. His walking stick pierced a hole in the ground with each step he took. Out of the hundreds of people in the village that he approached, only 2 had been kind enough to not only acknowledge him, but to also donate some of what they had. A fear and aversion to night creatures was understandable. Humans feared what they did not understand, and many did intend to cause harm to others. But that was the point of the disguise. Masking as a human and asking for aid showcased a person's true colors. If people couldn't treat their own with kindness and respect, then they didn't deserve the protection and fortune that they were afforded. The old man turned to face the village gate. He had managed to enter and exit the village without a problem, as many people turned a blind eye even after a quick glance at him. He struck the ground with his staff, bowed his head, and began chanting. An orange glowing line burnt its way into the ground right outside of the village gate and began to circle around the perimeter of the village. As the circle completed, the orange glow rose, creating a barrier around the whole village. No one inside the barrier would be able to see it, but they also wouldn't be able to leave it. The man left his staff in the ground as he made his way back into the village. There were some people he needed to talk to before wiping the place off the map. I pounded on Aravi's door, frantically shouting at her house, trying to get her to respond. I waited and waited, but got no response. The only thing I could hear was the muffled sound of music coming through the walls. I would have waited longer had I the time, but time was not on my side. I looked over my shoulder to make sure my boisterous display didn't draw any unwanted attention. All clear. I reached into my pockets and pulled out some iron ingots. Holding them in my hands, I closed my eyes and concentrated. I slammed my hands together and suddenly the ingots were gone, replaced by a large battering ram. I reeled back and slammed the battering ram into the door. It shook, but remained closed. I repeated the process 2 more times before the door finally gave way. I burst into Aravi's house, not knowing what to expect. Ever since she was possessed, Aravi and Hex have gotten along pretty well, but you can never be too sure when it comes to a night creature. Luckily, nothing was wrong. Aravi was just cleaning her daggers with Hex's help, with music playing from a gramophone in the corner. My sudden appearance finally seemed to grab her attention, though my exhausted expression didn't seem to cause her much concern. "Can I help you?" I stood up and caught my breath before I responded to her. The situation was tense, and I needed to find the best words to quickly fill her in. A night creature is in the village. It disguises itself as a sickly old man and goes from village to village asking for charity. The more people who refuse to help, the greater danger that particular village is in. I gave him some coins I had on me, but I can't say for certain how many others did the same. Before I could even finish my thought, a large crashing sound rang out from outside of Aravi's house. The cleansing had already begun. Aravi and I were both out of the house in an instant. Me to see what horrors my village had brought upon itself, and Aravi excited at the prospect of having something to slay. Stepping outside, we saw nothing but absolute chaos. It couldn't have been more than an hour since I came across the old man, but there were already fires in buildings and people running around in a blind panic. I looked around to see if I could find the old man, but he was nowhere in sight. What I did see were tiny tentacled creatures scurrying across the ground and chasing after people. They were fast and easily caught up with their targets. "Yikes, kilomorphs?" Aravi chuckled to herself, somehow finding amusement in the chaos. "That's a brutal way to go." "You recognize these things?" I responded. "I've taken down 1 or 2 of the full-sized ones before. The babies will infest living creatures to grow their numbers and then kill the host." That sounded rather harsh to me, but I remember the old man was meant to eradicate all those he deemed unworthy. Once again, I tried to see if there was any sign of him, but no luck. "Look out!" I heard Aravi call out to me and I looked up. Above me was a massive creature made of bones and vines, growing larger as it plummeted toward the earth. I dove out of the way just in time, but hit the ground hard. As the dust settled, I could see an adult kilomorph towering over me. It was easily 8 feet tall, and even though it appeared to have no eyes, I could feel it staring into my soul. Its vine-like fingers dragged along the ground as it approached me. I tried to pull out some materials from my pouches, but when I reached for it, I only grabbed air. Frantically looking around, I saw the pouches a little ways away, right beside where the creature had initially landed. It must have fallen off as I dove to avoid the attack. I tried to see if there were any loose rubble that I could use to craft something with, but there was nothing. Despite all the fire and viscera happening around me, I managed to land in the one unscathed spot. Brilliant. The creature came closer and closer. It threw its fingers at me, wrapping them around my leg. My body scraped across the ground as it reeled me in like a fish who had taken the bait. I beat at the vines, trying to knock them loose, but it was no use. The creature didn't even so much as flinch. The monster raised its arms, and the world turned upside down as I was lifted into the air, rendering me unable to face the kilomorph as it prepared to feast on me. I kept writhing and squirming, hoping that any second my leg would slip from the creature's grasp and I would luckily, if very painfully, hit the ground. Despite all my efforts, it still came as a shock to me when I saw the ground approaching, mostly due to the fact that I could still feel the vines grasping around my leg. I quickly threw my body backwards, readjusting myself to land on my feet rather than my neck. The landing was sudden, and I had to stumble a bit before I could take in my surroundings. Fortunately, I happened to land right next to my pouches of materials. I picked them up and surveyed the battlefield. The kilomorph was standing, but rather than trying to devour all the villagers in the surrounding area, it was wailing in pain. I looked down and saw its vines were on the ground, completely severed from the rest of the creature, like a dagger had cut clean through it. Another dagger flew through the air and cut the kilomorph across the face. The creature stumbled as it howled in pain. Then suddenly, a green ghostly hand came barreling towards me. I braced myself, unsure of what horrible creature it belonged to. The hand grabbed me and pulled me away from the battle as the kilomorph toppled over, kicking up another massive cloud of dust. As the dust settled again, I found myself next to Aravi, holding a set of daggers, with Hex feeding her more whenever she ran out. Seems you and Hex are getting along quite well. I couldn't help but crack a smile seeing Aravi using her new abilities. We need to get out of here now. Aravi and I ran through the village, dodging baby kilomorphs that tried to launch themselves at us, fighting them off with Hex's seemingly infinite supply of daggers. The village was almost completely destroyed by now. Every building was burnt down and baby kilomorphs were feasting on the remains of the villagers. I tried to avoid looking at them, at a reminder that, after everything, I failed to protect the village I had sworn to. The village's main gate was fast approaching, and I could see the old man's staff stuck into the ground just beyond the heavy wooden doors. I picked up my speed, making a mad dash toward the exit, Aravi following close behind, still tossing daggers at the trailing kilomorphs. We reached the gate and I ran past into the open area between the village and the woods without a problem. I stopped to catch my breath, relieved that the nightmare was finally over. While the kilomorphs could pass through the barrier the old man set up, they would be more focused on the people inside the village, as unfortunate as that was. That was a close one, right, Aravi? My heart sank as I was met with only silence. I slowly turned back toward the village, fearing the worst. Sure enough, Aravi was on the other side of the orange barrier, unable to pass through. Her fate sealed by the old man. Aravi, I said softly as I approached the barrier. Don't tell me you turned a blind... Of course I didn't turn a blind eye. She sounded almost offended that I would even ask such a question. I've never even come across the old man, so I didn't even have the chance to ignore him. Aravi wasn't making a strong case for herself, but I believed her. The old man wasn't known for testing every single person in the village before casting his judgment, which often led to many innocents being caught in his cleansing rituals. Those who showed him kindness would be spared, as well as the occasional person meant to serve as a warning to the next village. But for all those who never met the old man, there was only death. The sound of flapping wings turned me away from Aravi. I looked to the sky, and swooping down towards me was a large winged creature. It landed on the ground with a thud, and I saw it, the old man's true form. His gray hair was now a fiery red mane, his already grotesque nails now sharp claws ready to rend the flesh of those he deemed unworthy. The old man, in his new monstrous form, walked towards his staff still embedded in the ground. He looked at my burning village, the fire illuminating the night sky. If he saw Aravi trying to force her way past the barrier, I couldn't tell. He then lowered his head and spoke to me.
Your generosity has saved you from death. Go forth, journey to the nearest village and warn them of the ill fate that you witnessed tonight.
Instead of obeying his words, I stood my ground. No, I'm not leaving my village. Beast before me looked confused, and I couldn't blame him. The village was almost nothing but a large pile of ash. There was nothing left. But I wasn't going to leave my companion behind. You go village to village, judging only a handful of people. I looked at the creature dead in the eye as I spoke. Despite Aravi now having a supernatural ability of her own, I wasn't eager to show her mind just yet. So talking was my only option. And if enough refuse you, you burn the place down and slaughter everyone inside. But what about those who never even got a chance? A small portion of people shouldn't seal the fate of everyone. How many people other than me showed you kindness in this village? The night creature seemed to think about my words. I was worried what the response would be, if he even answered my question at all.
One other had donated their earnings to me in my other form.
My heart sank for a moment. That was a much lower number than I was expecting. Nevertheless, it still proved the point I was trying to make. You see, not everyone you preyed upon ignored you. So how can you confidently wipe out everyone but a select few without even testing them? Aravi here never even met you, I said as I gestured toward the barrier, where Aravi had been standing the whole time. I didn't know if she was listening, as she was being unusually quiet. How are you going to damn her to the same fate as those who turned a blind eye to you? Again, the creature paused as it took in what I was saying. Slowly, it began to transform back into an old, sickly man. At his now human height, the old man approached the staff, grabbed it, and pulled it ever so slightly out of the ground. I turned to look back at the village, where a small hole had opened up in the barrier in front of Aravi. Even though her back was turned as she tried to defend herself against the ever-increasing wave of kilomorphs closing in on her, she must have sensed an opening, as she quickly stepped through into the outside world, the hole closing immediately behind her. I ran up to Aravi and embraced her, almost getting skewered in the process as she still had daggers in both of her hands. It seemed civil conversation was an effective method against this particular night creature, a rare case. However, the nightmare wasn't over just yet.
The curse of the Wendigo,
the old man said, though he seemed to be speaking only to me.
These woods prey on the hunger of man, turning them into bloodthirsty beasts that rampage through the forest, killing anything and everything in their path. Dispel the curse, and the girl may walk away, untethered by the fate of your village. You may accompany her, but she must ultimately be the one to destroy it.
Aravi and I turned to look at each other. If it was the only way to save her, then we had to take it. Neither of us spoke. We simply turned back to the old man and nodded in agreement at his proposal.
Excellent.
He turned towards the forest and raised a finger.
There you'll find the victims of the curse. Good luck.
The old man grabbed his staff, his body transforming back into his monstrous form. spread his wings, and disappeared into the night sky. Aravi and I checked our equipment, Aravi her daggers, and me my materials, and made our way into the woods. As always, thank you all so much to the people who submitted. I love doing these, and I love the ones where I get to practice background work because it really makes the pieces just fully come together. It turned out so great. Thank you to everyone who submitted, and a special thank you and congratulations to those who were chosen. Apple Flavors, Tough, and Frederick. And now for the January 2024 recreations prompt. And because this video came out a little late, I might just make this video at the end of February to give you all enough time to write lore and design characters. But what I want you to create is your own animatronic. Think FNAF, Chuck E. Cheese, Indigo Park, all that kind of stuff. Whatever you think would be good for a fast food joint or a theme park and an animatronic mascot for that, I want you to draw it. I'm coming up with this idea off the cuff, so I don't know if this is going to be a story or a design notes based recreation, but I'm still very interested to see what you all have to design. And that's all I got for you today. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to hit the like and subscribe button. It really helps out the channel. And if you want more videos, then I highly recommend you check out the previous episode of this series where I turned Monster Prom monsters into monsters. Do that one again. Then I highly recommend you check out the previous episode of this series where I turned Monster Prom characters into more folklore-like monsters. Or you can check out all the other previous community redraws to give you some inspiration for next month. My name is KyngPin, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.